There are stories that make us rethink everything about time, about life, and especially about death. Most people believe that the end is the end. But what if I told you that sometimes it's precisely in tragedy that a miracle finds space? To be born? That day, no one expected it. A young man full of plans, with a bright future ahead of him, left home smiling and never returned. A brutal accident, news that tore a family apart. What no one knew is that, even before he left, he had already made a choice, one of those that seems small, but can change everything. And it was this choice that, in the height of grief, became a ray of hope for 3 different families. A mother about to lose her sight, a father saying goodbye to his children, a teacher fighting to keep living. When all seemed lost, the death of one became the rebirth of many. A decision that would touch lives in ways not even those involved could have imagined. The most impressive thing: this story is true. And it will show you that sometimes the greatest act of love happens when we're no longer here to see it. Prepare to be moved, inspired, and perhaps change the way you see life. That dawn seemed like so many others. The sky painted a tranquil blue, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee in the kitchen, and the sound of the old gate opening as Daniel, backpack on his back, walked out smiling toward the future. He was only 22, but he carried with him a quiet maturity, the kind that expresses itself more in actions than words. It was his last semester of engineering school, the dream he had built with sweat, resilience, and above all, gratitude for every achievement. He was the kind of young man who hugged his grandparents tenderly, who said, "Thank you," to the bus driver, and who always offered help even when no one asked. That day, however, held a script that not even the most perceptive of minds could have foreseen. On the way to college, a truck lost control on a curve and hit Daniel's car head-on. A sharp impact, a futile break, and time froze. The news came like a silent knife piercing the hearts of those who loved him. The call from the hospital was brief, cold, impersonal, but the effect was devastating. His mother, Linda, upon hearing the name Daniel, dropped the phone to the floor. His father, Michael, always silent, knelt without saying anything, as if to stop the world from crashing down on his shoulders. The small, close-knit town also fell silent. Teachers, classmates, neighbors, all felt the weight of the absence of someone who spread light wherever he went. And even amid the grief, the emotion, the heart-rending pain, a specific memory emerged like a whisper of hope in Daniel's mother's heart. A seemingly banal conversation, years before, that would transform everything. During a university campaign, Daniel had signed up to be an organ donor. A gesture that, for him, was simple and impulsive, but one that overflowed with empathy, love, and a profound sense of humanity. "If anything ever happens to me, let my life be used to save others," he said with an unassuming smile to his mother. Words that remained hidden like leaves in the wind until that day arrived. At the hospital, amidst machines beeping and doctors rushing through the hallways, the staff announced that Daniel was brain dead. An irreversible loss. But behind the tragedy, the opportunity for 3 miracles arose. And so it was that a mother, in the throes of grief, heard her son's voice again, not with her ears, but with her conscience, and felt there was still something to do. It was spring when Daniel participated in a university campaign about organ donation. Amidst pamphlets and lectures, one phrase stuck with him: "You can be the difference between life and death for someone." Without a second thought, he signed the form, affixed the "I'm a donor" sticker to the back of the document, and upon arriving home, he said lightly to Linda, his mother, "If one day I'm no longer here, I want to keep helping." At the time, it felt like a beautiful gesture, albeit distant. But time, wise as it is, imprinted those words with a weight that would only surface years later, when each syllable would sound like a silent plea from beyond, full of love, understanding, and emotional intelligence. Linda never forgot her son's expression that day, confident, generous, almost as if he already knew his simple gesture carried greater meaning. And now, standing before his inert body, with the machines blinking and the room filled with a dense sadness, she vividly remembered Daniel's promise. Michael, his father, remained seated in the corner, his eyes lost on the floor, trying to find an internal solution to something that could not be fixed. The pain was sharp, raw, visceral. But even so, there, inside that hospital room, there was something more. There was the spark of generosity, the echo of kindness, the courage to respect a child's last wishes, even if it meant diving headfirst into active mourning. It was then that, together, they made the decision. Through tears and trembling hands, Linda said to the doctor, "Yes, make the donation." And that phrase, filled with pain and unconditional love, would be the bridge between the end of one life and the beginning of 3 more. In that moment, pain intertwined with hope, and the silence was filled with purpose. Many say they don't know if they would have the strength to decide something like that. But when one has wisdom, when one carries the humility to listen to what another has left as a legacy, the answer comes not from the mind, but from the heart. And there, between the lines of the goodbye, the next miracle began to take shape. Room where the decision was made seemed frozen in time. The air conditioning hummed softly, and each second seemed to weigh heavily on Linda and Michael's shoulders. The doctor entered with silent steps, holding a form that seemed to scream everything they didn't want to hear. "We need formal authorization to begin the donation process." Linda stared at the paper as if facing an insurmountable mountain. Signing. It was like saying goodbye for the second time. And yet, she knew, this gesture held something greater. It held love, perseverance, compassion, and a profound act of selflessness. Her hands trembled, but her heart was steadfast, guided by a strength only mothers know. Michael, with his composed demeanor, held his wife's hand. It was the first time since the accident that he had said something out loud. He wanted this. Let's let him continue to be a light, even when he's not here. That phrase, spoken with sincerity, opened the door to a new layer of understanding. It was understanding entering into grief, emotional intelligence blossoming amidst tragedy. By signing, he felt as if he were releasing Daniel for a new mission, a mission that, though invisible, had the power to transform destinies. And so, in an act of pure trust and courage, they handed Daniel over not to death, but to the continuation of life, to the multiplication of good. The nurse who took the authorization simply said, "You saved lives today." But Linda could barely hear. She simply closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let herself be enveloped by an avalanche of feelings: fear, insecurity, pain, but also a kind of silent gratitude for knowing that her son, even in his end, was still a solution for so many. Many talk about miracles as if they were mystical phenomena, far from reality. But there, in that cold hospital corridor, 3 of them were beginning to blossom. And while the medical teams mobilized with precision, someone somewhere was about to receive the heartbeat of a new chance. In a Chicago hospital, miles away, 54-year-old Robert Jenkins was on the verge of saying goodbye. His heart was no longer responding to treatment, and the doctors had made it clear, either an emergency transplant was necessary, or he had only days left. Hospitalized for weeks, he had already said goodbye to his children, jotted down passwords, left letters, and even picked out his suit for the wake. But deep in his eyes, there was still a spark of hope, fueled by faith, humility, and the desire for another Christmas with his family. The morning after Daniel's accident, the medical team entered Robert's room with the news that would change everything. A compatible heart had been found. It was strong, young, and healthy. The process was immediate. Ambulances scrambled, helicopters were called, and the transplant team sprang into action like an orchestra driven by the urgency of life. Meanwhile, Daniel's body was prepared with respect, dignity, and affection. Every professional there knew that this young man was not just a donor, but someone offering the noblest part of himself. When the heart arrived at the operating room, time was a relentless enemy. But the team, trained and motivated by the possibility of a different outcome, operated with precision. After hours, the silence in the room was broken by a beep. Then, another. Robert's new heart was beating. Life had been successfully reconnected. When Robert woke, still groggy from the anesthesia, he looked around in confusion. His daughter, teary-eyed, held his hand tenderly. He felt something different in his chest. It wasn't pain, it was rhythm. It was life beating strongly again. Emotion filled the room. And upon learning that the donor was a 22-year-old man who had made this conscious choice while still alive, Robert murmured through tears, "I will honor this every day of my life." Gratitude transformed the man. He was no longer just someone saved. He was now a guardian of a legacy, carrying within his chest not only a new heart, but a new meaning for living. And as this happened, another life also began to be reborn. At St. Louis Children's Hospital, a 9-year-old boy named Ethan had been living in a world of shadows for 4 years. A degenerative disease had slowly and relentlessly robbed him of his sight. Since he was 5, his reality had been constructed based on sounds, smells, and touches. His mother, Rachel, did everything she could to make that everyday life a light. But she carried within her the anguish of not being able to show her son the world. When the doctors announced that a compatible cornea had been found, she wept like someone seeing the door of hope open after years of being locked. It was as if a stranger had reached out, bringing back the possibility of seeing life with her own eyes. The surgery was urgently scheduled. Ethan, curious as ever, asked if he would be able to see his mother's face. "Yes, my love," she replied, her voice breaking, her heart breaking, but filled with courage. During the preparation for the procedure, the medical team discussed the donor among themselves. A young man named Daniel, full of life, who had transformed his own death into a gesture of love and hope. The surgery lasted less than 2 hours, but what unfolded there was a true, silent revolution. In the end, the doctors were confident. The corneas had adapted well. Now all that was left was to wait for healing to remove the bandages. When the day arrived, Rachel could barely contain her excitement. Sitting beside her son, she held his hand tightly as the medical team carefully removed the bandages. "Are you ready, Ethan?" the ophthalmologist asked with a smile in her eyes. He nodded, and as his eyelids slowly opened, his eyes, previously opaque, now reflected light. The first thing he saw was his mother's face, blurred but visible. He smiled broadly, pointing in surprise. Rachel burst into tears. The emotion of that scene was beyond words. And in that moment, the whole world seemed to have gained more color. The light Daniel carried in his eyes now illuminated the path to a new childhood. And someone else, somewhere else, was being given a new lease on life. At a university hospital in Denver, 37-year-old literature professor Anna Mitchell was facing the darkest chapter of her life. Diagnosed with a serious liver condition, she had been hospitalized for weeks, her body weakened and her spirit challenged to endure. Her students sent letters, videos, and poems, trying to repay some of the generosity and inspiration she had spread for so many years. But inside that ICU, the days passed slowly and hope began to fade. Until the morning after Daniel's accident, the hospital received news that would change everything. A compatible liver had emerged. It was young, healthy, and perfectly suited for Anna's body. There was no time to waste. The surgical team sprang into action with precision. The professor was rushed to the operating room, and while being anesthetized, she murmured a phrase the nurse never forgot. "Tell my students that literature teaches them how to live, and now how to live again." During the operation, the professionals worked with absolute focus. The organ had been transported with care and affection, as if each cell carried a piece of hope and love. Anna survived the surgery, and in the hours that followed, her body responded positively. It was as if her organism had received a new flame. The flame of Daniel's life, now rekindled in a different form. Weeks later, Anna returned to teaching, initially remotely, and then in the classroom, surrounded by students who could barely contain their emotion upon seeing her again. Instead of avoiding the topic, she brought it to the center of her lessons. She spoke of resilience, emotional intelligence, overcoming obstacles, and the importance of organ donation. She said she was alive because someone chose to love beyond their own existence, and that each time she wrote a sentence on the board, she was honoring this gesture. Her students began to see life more deeply. Her story became an example. And while Anna rediscovered the rhythm of life, the other parts of Daniel also vibrated on new journeys of humanity. A few weeks after the transplants, Daniel's 3 recipients felt a common and powerful need to express their gratitude. Although the donor's identity was protected by law, each of them wrote a letter addressed to the family of the young man who had given them a new chance. The words were imbued with emotion, honesty, and humanity. Robert wrote with a heavy heart, saying that with each beat of his new heart, he thought of the family who had the courage to donate amidst their pain. Ethan, helped by his mother, drew a smiling sun and wrote, "Thank you for giving me eyes to see the world." Anna, with her sensitive writing, said that her classes now had more purpose as she carried within her a living story of hope, understanding, and love. These letters were delivered to the transplant center, which, due to confidentiality rules, kept the senders anonymous. The hospital staff, in turn, forwarded the messages to Daniel's family, still without revealing their authors. Linda and Michael received the envelopes in silence. They sat side by side in the living room and carefully opened each piece of paper, as if touching a reliquary. Reading those words was like receiving echoes from their son, only through new voices. The pain of grief was still there, firm and present, but now it was accompanied by something rare, the clear realization that their son lived on between the lines of other people's destinies. For a long time, those letters were kept in a wooden box alongside photos, notebooks, and Daniel's belongings. Linda reread them on difficult days as an antidote to loneliness. Michael, from time to time, would sit alone on the porch and recite passages quietly, almost as if in prayer. The gratitude that came from those words offered an unexpected form of comfort. It was as if, even without knowing the faces behind those lines, they felt a deep connection, made of sincerity, generosity, and emotional intelligence. And little did they know that this connection would one day become much more concrete. Almost 2 years after the accident, Linda was invited to an event hosted by a National Association of Organ Donors and Recipients. The invitation came by email, but it felt like a spiritual calling. Michael hesitated to go, but she, with a mother's intuition, felt she needed to be there. The auditorium was simple, with chairs arranged in rows and soft lights. There were parents, children, doctors, volunteers, all with stories of loss and rebirth. When Linda was called to the stage to tell Daniel's story, silence fell. She spoke calmly, but her eyes conveyed the depth of a heart that had known the depths of pain and the surface of hope. As she narrated, someone in the audience began to cry quietly. It was Robert. He had heard many stories at such gatherings, but this one in particular made his chest vibrate differently. When Linda mentioned the city, Daniel's age, and the phrase he had said to his mother years before, Robert no longer had any doubts. His body trembled, and he lowered his head, trying to contain his emotion. At the end of his speech, he stood, walked to the stage, and with a choked voice, asked to say a few words. The audience was in suspense. "I am the man who received your son's heart," he said, and within seconds, the emotion exploded into tears. Applause and hugs. Linda burst into tears. The embrace between them was long silent, full of affection, forgiveness, and the power of kindness. Michael then came up, embracing them both. That scene was recorded by several people, but more than an image, it was etched in everyone's memory as a modern miracle. Not a mystical miracle, but a miracle made of choices, empathy, giving, reconciliation, and courage. They didn't know it, but they were also inspiring other families there, encouraging them to talk about organ donation, resilience, life, and purpose. And in that embrace between the invisible donor and the grateful recipient, a new seed of something greater was planted. After meeting Robert, Linda and Michael felt something inside them had changed forever. The pain of losing Daniel still lingered, of course, but now it was accompanied by a sense of purpose that was difficult to describe. It was as if Daniel himself, in his physical absence, had lit a torch in the darkness, illuminating a new path. With the support of friends, doctors, and other parents who had experienced similar stories, they founded the Multiplied Lives Project. The goal was clear: to promote lectures, educational campaigns, and awareness events about the importance of organ donation. They began with small meetings, but were soon speaking at school auditoriums, universities, and community events. Linda learned to transform her grief into a discourse. She used words with understanding and emotional intelligence, knowing how to touch hearts without forcing tears. In each presentation, she brought photos of Daniel, his story, his choice, and the real impact his generosity had made. Michael, more reserved, handled the project structure, contacts, and logistics. The couple became a local reference. Over 1,000 people signed up as donors after hearing his story. Some teenagers arrived at the end of the events with tears in their eyes, saying they had never considered the importance of such a gesture. What grew out of tragedy became a mission, and the mission became a movement. Schools began requesting the project's presence as part of their human development curriculum. Teachers included Daniel's story in their ethics, biology, and even literature classes. His story became a symbol of overcoming adversity, love, courage, and solidarity. And the most beautiful thing was seeing young people, like he once was, saying, "If something ever happens to me, I want my life to continue helping others." The project grew, but never lost its essence. It was about lives that continued, about pain that transformed, about respect for humanity in its most sensitive form. And even with all this happening, one last piece of this puzzle still needed to find its place. Time passed, as it always does, but Daniel's memory never faded. He was no longer present in recent family photos, but he became eternal in every conversation. Every lecture, in every beat of Robert's heart, in the sparkle in Ethan's eyes, and in Anna's inspiring words. The Multiplied Lives Project grew into a national organization, with volunteers, partnerships, and stories intertwined with the same essence, transforming tragedy into purpose, grief into movement, loss into hope. And there wasn't a single event where Linda didn't repeat with serenity and truth, "Daniel died that day, but he lives on in 3 people. And that's greater than any pain." The recipient families, once mere numbers on medical records, became part of the Mitchell story. Lunches on special occasions, letters exchanged, video calls filled with smiles and sincere tears. It was as if the love that lived within Daniel had split into parts, finding new homes. The connection between them wasn't just biological. It was spiritual, emotional, and deeply human. Ethan, now grown, told his friends that he saw the world through the eyes of someone who chose to give. Anna began writing chronicles about her experience, and Robert, every year, went for a checkup followed by a visit to the Mitchells. There was no obligation. It was pure gratitude. Today, Daniel's story is told in classrooms, books, documentaries, and conversation circles. It is a story filled with empathy, generosity, humility, honesty, and the purest form of altruism. A story that touches those who listen, that teaches without imposing, that inspires without judging. Daniel is not remembered for the accident, but for the choice he made in life. A choice few have the courage to make, a choice that created life. 3 miracles, yes, but also countless transformations in people who never knew him, but who learned from him. And this, without a doubt, is an eternal legacy. And so, after hearing this story, tell me, how do you look at life now? It's impossible to emerge unscathed from a narrative like this. The pain of one family that turns into hope for 3 others. A gesture made in silence years ago that saved lives. This isn't just about organ donation, it's about empathy, about respect for the existence of others, about love that transcends death, about the power of kindness in its purest form. Have you talked to your family about this? Have you reflected on how your decisions today might echo in someone's heart tomorrow? The world needs more gestures of compassion, more actions guided by wisdom, not fear, more choices made with emotional intelligence and altruism, even when no one is watching. If this story touched you, share it. And please tell me in the comments, what moved you most? What did this story teach you? Would you have the courage to make a decision like this? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join us on this journey of stories that awaken awareness, kindness, and transformation. Because every life matters, and every life can inspire another.